time and time, we've seen that Islamic Republic has really failed to follow through with some of these threats. Part of it is they're afraid of really a wider scale conflict, but more importantly, it's about capacity. Israel's war in June really decimated Iran's ability to launch their missiles because they lost all their launchers.
Now, let's turn to events in Iran. Donald Trump has announced that countries doing business with Tehran face tariffs of 25% of all business being done with the United States. Americans in Iran are also being urged to leave the country as protests are escalating. Now, Mr. Trump has reportedly been briefed on options for US military intervention, two Department of Defense officials confirmed. So what could American military action in Iran look like, and will the president follow through with his threat after quite a lot of talking? Let's speak to Janatan Sayeh, a research analyst at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, focusing on Iranian domestic affairs. Hello, Janatan.
Hi, it's great to be with you.
Thanks so much for joining us. Now, let's start with these tariffs. The US president has announced 25% tariffs on all business being done with Iran. What kind of business is this mostly affecting?
So we have to look at who Iran's trading partners are. It is primarily China, Pakistan, India, actually, to an extent, Turkey, and the UAE. It is oftentimes different exports, natural resources. Many times it's mined minerals. Effectively, it is products that have not been previously sanctioned under the maximum pressure campaign. So evidently, oils have been heavily sanctioned. Metals have also been sanctioned, such as steel. So this is really going beyond that, trying to really minimize Iran's non-oil exports. Even though they don't comprise most of the Islamic Republic's economy, nonetheless, it would have an impact on the current status as it relates to the crumbling rial against the dollar and other currencies.
And which countries are these tariffs going to affect the most? There's been a lot of talk about Russia and Turkey, which have still continued to trade with Iran despite those sanctions. Are they going to be able to take much notice or be impacted by this at all?
To an extent, they will be. Turkey is probably going to be affected more than Russia will be. It is effectively more of a regional trade. You have to remember that Iran's, again, major exports, in addition to, as we said, oils, to Turkey and to Iraq a lot of time was electricity. Now, there was a waiver for that for many, many years. That has also been revoked. Whether it would have a significant impact on those countries, that is very unlikely. What's going to happen is that I think the Iranians are going to be the first to notice the influence of this new embargo that has been imposed on them. It is unlikely to really cause a major effect in the local economy of different countries.
So why do you think the US president is doing this? Is this a sort of a kind of precursor to military action, or is this something that he's doing because it's the sort of most simple lever he can pull as president?
Ultimately, if you as a president are going to threaten to strike a country, you have to have a build up to that. In this context, I think is more so about ensuring that they can do something immediately. Any strike against the Islamic Republic sites would require extensive coordination, potentially with allies and amongst different apparatus within America. So before getting there, you have to at least act immediately, given how horrific the situation is on the ground in Iran. More than 12,000 unarmed protesters have died. And this is not the only measure that Washington has taken in the short term. There's also reports of cyber attacks against propaganda outlets ran by the regime. So these seem to be more immediate measures, potentially building to something greater. But nonetheless, Washington has to back some of the threats against the Islamic Republic. So at least it signals that there's political will behind striking Iran.
And what's the kind of rhetoric, Janatan, from your perspective, that's coming out of the White House? Because I think it was last week the US president said that if the Tehran regime targeted protesters, he would hit them hard. Now, you've mentioned we've done the sanctions, there's been the cyber attacks, but there's not actually been any military action yet. So again, is this US president being a bit bellicose, or do you think this is that he is actually still going to take action? As you mentioned, that body count is very sadly increasing.
Trump was very clear that his red line, at least how he said it, was a massacre of civilians. Now, ideally, we wouldn't see him push this red line around, That is a case that happened in Syria. America had a red line as to how many death tolls would inquire or really lead to intervention. That red line kept getting pushed, and ultimately we didn't see American involvement in Syria, and we ended up with about 500,000 dead Syrians, most of whom that were civilians. In this context, really, I think they're weighing different options on how to go about it. The challenge there is, if there's an ongoing civic movement on the ground, and if you want to strike, on paper, it seems like you might be aiding this protest movement. However, it might have an effect where if an unarmed secular protester on the ground is protesting against the regime and they see U.S. warplanes bombing certain military sites, that might deter them. So the question is, do you first strike the repression apparatus in favor of the protesters, then take out the military sites? The issue with that logic is you want to make sure that Iran doesn't have the ability to retaliate. So if you look at the sequence, it would make more sense to first target ballistic missile stockpiles so Iran cannot retaliate, then go after the apparatus. But that does risk alienating the ongoing movement.
Because I believe the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament has threatened to target American bases. Sort of comment like that sort of poke the bear into Donald Trump taking action, because you said the sequencing is quite crucial there.
It is. I mean, the Islamic Republic is no stranger to threats. That's probably what they're best at, issuing different threats. Whether they follow through with that, we have not seen it. So in two cases, both under the Trump administration, first time when they struck General Soleimani, as he was designated as a terrorist, I think prior to that, in Baghdad, what the Islamic Republic did was, in advance, they notified Americans so they would evacuate a base in Iraq, and the base was not heavily struck either, in order to avoid further escalation. So Iran's response has always been tamed just to appease its support base without letting it spiral into a wider war. And we saw the same thing after Trump bombed the nuclear sites in Natanz and Fordow. Iranians again called ahead, asked us to evacuate the base in Qatar, and similarly a few missiles that didn't really strike anything, and they were all intercepted. So time and time we've seen that Islamic Republic has really failed to follow through with some of these threats. Part of it is they're afraid of really a wider scale conflict, but more importantly, it's about capacity. Israel's war in June really decimated Iran's ability to launch their missiles because they lost all their launchers. So that's a key factor there. So it really comes down to will and capacity, and it seems like Iran has neither.
And just finally, Janatan, briefly, what do you see happening over the coming days in Iran, that we're starting to see some more internet coverage return and you're getting more reports from on the ground? Because that's one of the big challenges involved in this, has been the fact that we don't really know what's going on there, and you've got propaganda from the Tehran regime versus what's coming out from protesters who can get stuff out there. But just very briefly, how do you see things going from the next kind of couple of days and a week or so?
The next 2 days will be crucial because the protests cannot afford to be really backscale what they're doing. It is a point of no return for the average Iranian on the ground, as they've been protesting for so long, and they've actually lost so many, like I said, unarmed protesters. They cannot afford to push back this ongoing movement.